authors are here, and we will be happy to autograph them. You might be wondering, well, why do we have models? Why do we have sparkling cider? Why do we have fabulous food? Well, it's because it's competitive out there. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. I worked in the Senate. I worked for 4 different senators, and I remember what would get me away from my desk and get me to the building next door or down the hall and around the corner. So we wanted to do the best we can with our first ever policy guide that is looking after secular issues and looking after the non-theistic community. So we've got all the major topics that we're going to go over today. Constitutional law, which is a little bit more of the history, health and safety issues, which is extremely robust, education, a lot of issues there, discrimination, tax policy, military, international, and then we also have footnotes and our resources here. So basically the guide is written with good policy recommendations that can be used internationally, that can also be used is mainly geared for the U.S. House and Senate, but then it can also be used at the state level. So some of the issues are state level issues. And you know how states can be laboratories for federal issues and vice versa. So we try to cover as much as we can, but not all issues are covered. And I really want to stress that the guide is put together, it's an open source document. We will be emailing it to everyone in the House and the Senate later today. We'll also be emailing it to everyone in the legislature and all of their staff in all 50 of the legislatures, all 50 states. And those email addresses just became available back in July with a paid service. And so if you're wondering about the dedication here, it's dedicated to Natasha, a Panamanian feline. Believe it or not, we had to go to Panama and talk to a cat to get the funding for this guide. But we did get the funding and we got it done. So we would like to thank that courageous cat for giving us the funding to put together the first policy guide that's looking after the issues that the non-theistic community cares about here in the United States. So it's a very much a guide that is a consensus-building guide, a coalition guide. We have 165 organizations that are signed on to this, backing it up, including also the 50 state chapters of the Secular Coalition for America. And the Secular Coalition was created to amplify the diverse and growing voice of the American non-theistic community. And our mission is to increase the visibility of and respect of the non-theistic viewpoint in the United States and protect and strengthen the secular character of our government as the best guarantee of freedom for all. So in 2013, 22% of Americans now report themselves as atheist, agnostic, or otherwise religiously unaffiliated. And this makes this non-affiliated group the 4th largest traditional religious group in the United States. So after Catholicism, after Protestant, and after evangelistic. But it's currently the 2nd largest religion if you look at Christianity combined, and then the non-theist community would be the 2nd largest. And more interestingly, 35% of all adults aged 30 and under do not affiliate with any particular religion. This is 3 times as many that identify as unaffiliated over 70 years old. So the younger you get, the numbers swell, and the tracking shows that they continue to be unaffiliated. They're not becoming religious later on in life. So our coalition represents non-theists, but we do not ask government leaders to promote non-theism. America's strength lies in their robust marketplace of religious and non-religious ideas. Government officials may not and should not promote any articles of faith or faithlessness. Instead, they have a duty to protect the freedom of every American to believe or disbelieve in the God or gods of their choice. By advocating for the rights of the non-theistic minority, the Secular Coalition affirms its support for equal rights and freedoms for all Americans. So this guide is including select relevant issues with regard to separation of religion and government, and it's designed to assist legislatures and their staff and policymakers at the local, state, federal, international, and all branches of government. So we have it, like I mentioned, open source, where you can just grab any section you want. and added into your policy documents. I remember when I worked with 4 different senators, sometimes I would be given 3 hours and be told to have the pros and cons on a particular issue because there was going to be a vote, and have it from the best, most diverse stakeholder groups. So just to give you a feel for the volume and the numbers of the non-religious, for the sake of comparison, the atheists and agnostics, just those 2 core numbers, which are 8%, they outnumber the combined total of all American Jews, Muslims, Mormons, Buddhists, Hindu, Jehovah's Witness, and all the Christian Orthodox. So we're talking about a really large percentage of the American population. And currently the unaffiliated are the largest religious voting bloc in the Democratic Party, but this was not always the case, in that they're evenly split on economic issues. Currently, half of them want smaller government and half of them want larger governments. And even if you look at the libertarians, they're 27% non-religious, and that is a tie with mainline Protestant. So the policies that we advocate help to promote a religiously neutral government. They are solid policies that are good for the country as a whole, both for the religious and the non-religious alike. So we're going to go into the first topic that we're going to cover, and I'm going to give a really quick overview on the constitutional law section, which is the foundation, the framework of which everything is based on, and then we will move into health and safety, education, discrimination, tax policy, military, and international after that. Depending on a few of our speakers have not arrived, one's coming from New Jersey, and I believe the train just came in. So we might skip the order here, hoping to pick up a couple more speakers. So on the constitutional law, what we're talking about here would be the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So everything goes back to the Founding Fathers and the Constitution. So the Constitution, although generally setting up a government according to the will of a Democratic majority, protects the civil rights and liberties of all from abuse by the majority. Any law that violates the Bill of Rights, which includes the Establishment Clause, is constitutional. Therefore, it is irrelevant whether any particular government measure promoting religion is unpopular. If it violates the separation of church and state, the court must strike it down. So that's the bottom line on the Establishment Clause. So let's talk about religious displays on government property. There's a lot of issues going around the U.S. with 10 Commandments, religious holiday displays, cross memorials, and so we need to think about how does this affect people who are not Christian or not participating in that particular religion. So the Establishment Clause prohibits government sponsorship of religious messages. Therefore, it's inappropriate for government entities to erect or sponsor religious symbols or displays on government property. So our recommendation, we have a clear recommendation there. We've made them in red so people can't miss them. So restricting any religious symbols or displays on government property allows government entities to remain completely religiously neutral and conform to the court's interpretation of the Establishment Clause. So we would highly recommend local governments, state governments, and the federal government to just stay out of that business. Government funding of religious institutions, this is extremely important. The Establishment Clause prohibits government funding of religious institutions. Madison's memorial opposed even a 3-pence tax that would support teachers of the Christian religion as a dangerous abuse of power. This goes back to the early days of our country. Despite this principle, billions of taxpayer dollars have gone to religious groups to provide secular services. The law prohibits the use of the money for any specifically religious activity. For example, the government may not fund construction or repair of buildings in which religious activities will take place. But that's an issue that's happening right now in the House and the Senate. There have been numerous votes on taxpayer funds going to construct or reconstruct religious buildings after natural disasters. So our recommendation, strong recommendation here would be for taxpayer dollars should not fund religious activities or institutions as proselytizing and religiously motivated discrimination are inherent, and oversight is pretty much non-existent. So what about legislative prayer? That's something that you see here in the House and the Senate. You know, every day that there's a session is opened up with legislative prayer. Why is that allowed? Why is that acceptable? And what should be done about it? So prayer at government meetings is unnecessary. When government bodies lend their power and prestige to religion, it amounts to an endorsement that excludes the 22% of the population that's non-religious. Including prayer at religious meetings turns minorities, including atheist Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Wiccans, into second-class citizens. Even when prayer is non-denominational, any form of prayer will end up excluding various taxpayers and constituents. So it's much better to just stay away from that. And we have seen that some federal appellate courts have ruled that frequent sectarian prayers to Jesus affiliate the government with Christianity and are unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court revisited the Marsh decision in the fall of 2013, and the decision is expected in 2014. And when it took up the Town of Greece v. Galloway, which is a case that we were very involved in and filed an amicus brief along with some of the other representatives here today. So the recommendation policy there would be, because of the legal uncertainty and the exclusionary effect such prayers have on non-theists and others who do not share the faith of the officiant, the best practice is to exclude prayer at legislative meetings. So right now there's a carve-out that only legislatures can open with prayer because there's a belief that those prayers are only going to the particular legislatures and not any of the constituents. And then there has to be the option for opting out and all kinds of rules. So it'd be better to just get away from that. So that is our constitutional section, a little bit of a summary. And that gets us to page 13, which is health and safety. And Amanda, if you'd like to come up, or we can skip health and safety, and you can do it. You want to skip that? We can do it at the end because Amanda was on the train trying to get here from New Jersey. All right, so we'll move on to our next topic. Health and safety is a very robust, long one. So the next topic is education, and I will turn it over to Kelly Demereux with the Secular Coalition for America, and she'll walk us through the education section.
Thank you very much, Edwina. So I will be covering our education, discrimination, and tax policy. Our education expert is currently sitting on a plane waiting to be able to land on the DCA runways. So if you do want to catch his piece on education, his particular angle he brings to it as the executive director of the Secular Student Alliance, you're welcome to come over to our Senate side briefing at 2 o'clock, and I encourage you all to do so. So when it comes to education, I have a particular personal stake in these issues. Prior to going to law school and becoming an advocate for separation of religion and government, I was a teacher. I taught kindergarten, and I was able to see some of these issues up close and personal. And I can tell you that when we talk about education, we're talking about public schools, and we're saying that students they have all their First Amendment rights in public schools. They don't leave them at the schoolhouse gate, and that they are constitutionally protected from religious coercion when they're trying to get a quality public education. One of the biggest areas where this comes up is with school vouchers. We, as well as many organizations which we work with, including the National Coalition for Public Education, work to try to make sure that taxpayer funds and federal funds are not going to religious education or religious schools that often imbibe their curriculum with these religious principles, especially when it comes to those certain topics such as science. We've seen some pretty upsetting textbooks coming out of states with strong voucher programs such as Louisiana where actually in the science classrooms they're teaching that dinosaurs were roaming the earth with humans 6,000 years ago, and things that are not preparing our students to be leaders and for America to be globally competitive in the future in science and mathematics. So school vouchers is one of the areas we cover, but one of the more exciting areas is sex education. This is one where we've seen a lot of religious influence, although not necessarily directly, and we've also seen some real issues when it comes to fact-based and research-driven data. Some abstinence-only programs are sneaking in and being federally funded because they're supported by this research that shows that it works when we know that it doesn't. We know that quality research shows that abstinence-only education is leading to higher teen pregnancies, is leading to higher rates of STDs with students and with our young people, and we want to have them be properly educated to make their own choices. We're working on making sure that this funding is shifted from abstinence only to proper, medically accurate sex education. Currently, in less than 30 states, is sex education required to be medically accurate. So that's causing for some grave concerns there. One of our more popular issues we deal with is the teaching of evolution and then the teaching of creationism or intelligent design. Evolution is a politically charged issue, but it's not a scientific debate. Scientists are decided on this, and it should be part of every science curriculum. Creationism is not allowed to be taught in the classroom. Neither is intelligent design. So the latest tactic is taking over the words critical thinking, teaching the controversy, trying to play like there is actually a scientific controversy when it comes to evolution, when there is not. There is no teaching of both sides when one side is factually supported science and one side is a personal belief. In our classrooms, in our public school classrooms, we need to be teaching solid science that has been proven through the scientific method by actual scientists. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about school prayer. You hear a lot that they're taking prayer out of schools. Well, that's just not the case. Students have the right to pray voluntarily when they choose to do so, when they don't have their classmates at a school-sponsored event and all corralled in one area to influence them. Teachers, the authority figures, they're not allowed to push prayer onto the students. So it's trying to find that right balance between making sure that students have the right to follow their own beliefs without the authority figure of the school making the students follow what that individual who's in that authority role believes. So I'm going to move on to discrimination, which is kind of a two-sided topic when the Secular Coalition speaks about it. We're talking not just about discrimination based on someone's religion or lack of religion or lack of belief, but also religiously motivated discrimination. We see that mostly with the LGBT community, where religiously motivated discrimination is suddenly becoming a proper justification. Our campaign on this is called No Hate, No Exceptions. In no other area of civil rights law or anti-discrimination law is there a loophole like this. Is there equality with an asterisk saying that, well, you can discriminate if we think your reason is good enough. You can't discriminate based on, for that reason, for gender, for race, for national origin. There's no reason, if we're going to recognize this level of equality, that we should be writing in exceptions. Specific houses of worship, they're currently covered under constitutional law. We shouldn't be extending that to affiliated with religion organizations. We're talking about schools, we're talking about hospitals, so nurses, teachers, they do their jobs because they want to help make the world a better place because they're caring people, and they should not have to be subject to discrimination in doing so. So we've supported, on the Senate side, we've supported ENDA, where we were working very vigorously to make sure that an expanded religious exemption that would allow all employers to discriminate based on religion was reduced down to as narrow as possible to make sure it passes. And we're going to be doing the same over here in the House, supporting Congressman Polis's Employment Non-Discrimination Act. The other big issue with discrimination, of course, is marriage equality. Now this one seems pretty simple to me because there are two types of marriage, really. There is religious marriage, where you are recognized under your beliefs, under your faith, by your church or synagogue, temple, whatever. That's where they can choose to marry you, to not marry you, to make you go through different steps. But there is also civil marriage. This is controlled by the state. And when the state gets involved, they have to make sure that the laws to get a marriage license are not based on religious material. There's no reason that civil marriage laws should have religious influence on them. And that's why we think that marriage equality, at the laws of union of one man, one woman, that's a religious basis for civil marriage law, and those should not be on the books, and that's our policy. Okay, now for the most exciting one of all, taxes. There are some really serious tax loopholes right now for houses of worship. We really sincerely believe that this is an issue that shouldn't just be for the secular or the non-religious, but it should be one of the top priorities for the people who give their hard-earned money to their houses of worship. The largest portion of charitable giving of Americans goes to houses of worship, over 30% of it. And we have no idea what it's going to. We don't know what it's being spent on, how much is coming in. We have no details because the churches are inside of this complete bubble of protection that has been set up for them by Congress. The goal of tax reform, as has been stated, is to make a simpler and fairer tax code. And I can't think of anything that is more in line with that than removing these loopholes. It's going to simplify it. You just take these 3 provisions I'm going to mention out, and it's going to make it more fair because it's going to treat all nonprofits the same. So when a church wants to become tax exempt, every other organization fills out a 30-something page form. Taxes just say it. That's it. They send a letter saying, we're declaring this, and they are exempt. Every year, organizations, nonprofits that do great work like the Red Cross file a 990 form. It's basically their tax returns that they say, well, here's how much we took in, here's where it's going. For the majority of the small churches, the ones that people are concerned about burdening with filing tax forms, this is a postcard. If they bring in less than $250,000 a year in donations, it's a postcard with 7 questions, most of them, what's the address, what's the name, do you have a website? It's not a burden at all, but what it's going to help is the larger organizations where billions of dollars are funneling through and we don't know where they're going. The people who donate them can feel confident that they're being spent on actual charitable causes. One example is charitable giving has actually gone down quite a bit in the past few years as the scandals with the Catholic Church have risen. Part of that, we see a direct relationship between the announcement of thousands and millions of dollars in settlements with these particular priests and the drop in charitable giving. In the last 15 years, $3 billion has been spent settling these cases. When people give their money to a church, they want it to help people in need, not help the people who hurt people in need. If we want our country to continue being a charitable giving country, we have to give people the safety and security of knowing that their money is actually going to help people. The final protection for these for churches is called the Church Audit Procedures Act. And this says that the IRS cannot investigate a church that they might already suspect has wrongdoing going on unless they already have the proof to basically prove them guilty, which they can't get because the churches don't file anything, and that investigation has to be done by a high-level Treasury official. And the cases have shown that high-level means, a step or 2 below the Secretary of the Treasury. This all but grants them immunity from any sort of investigation. The religious, the non-religious, everyone should really care about where this money is going and why this cloud of secrecy is needed. These tax exemptions are voluntary, and if If the church chooses to keep its financial affairs private, they don't have to opt into the exemption. So there's really no reason why we can't make this happen with tax reform coming up in 2014. All right, with that, I'll turn it back over to Yvonne.
Thank you, Earl. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate that. So next, we are very fortunate to have with us Jason Torpy, who is with the Military Atheists and Free Thought, and he's going to take us through the military section here. So be sure to get some drinks and get some food and mix and mingle while we finish up our last few topics.
Thanks, Edwina. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. As a member of the coalition, the Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers provides input and real-world experience and information about what's going on within the Department of Defense and Veterans Administration to make sure that their policy and their advice represents constituent needs as closely as possible. In the guide, you're going to see some very specific recommendations that I'll recap at the end, but it's basically humanist identity, making sure that we can be ourselves within the military, lay leadership and support from the chaplains, ensuring that the chaplaincy, which is there for values and for resiliency from the beliefs that people have, making sure that that chaplaincy is there for everyone, not just people who believe like they do, and providing for humanist chaplains. When we have humanists that want to serve in the military in the position of the chaplaincy, there should be equal opportunity employment. And so I want to go through some specific examples of that. Taylor Grimm, it was a trainee going to Air Force basic training, and he went to training. Prior to doing that, he reached out to my organization and said, hey, I'd like some humanist support in basic training while I'm away from home, just like everyone else. And we said, yes, we've got volunteers, we're ready to go. As soon as you show up at basic training, just go to your chaplain and to your commander and say, I'd like some help. I'd like some support from me. So on the first Sunday, he did that. The Christians went, and they got the Christian support, the Catholics and the Jews and the Mormons, Hindus, Buddhists, everyone went to get their support, and he was told no. He was told no for a solid month from the chaplains. The chaplains refused to help him, and he eventually got some support from the command, and now with no advertising, no real kind of official channels to do this, just a little bit of openness from the commander, they've got almost 50 people meeting every week within training. So that's the kind of need that's out there. Bobby Walker in 2011 had grown a group at the Air Force Academy, a group of cadet freethinkers, and he was working very closely with the chaplains to try to build that group and to grow and to be part of the team, to work on the Interfaith Council. He asked about funding at one point and said, well, we just want to be treated equally, and we were just wondering if there might be any funding available. They threw him out, disavowed all support for non-theists, and even to this day, they get good support through the command, but the chaplains will have nothing to do with them, purely because of their beliefs. Doug Wright on the USS Rems, currently at sea, he's gone to the chaplains and said, hey, I'd like to be a lay leader. If somebody's a Mormon or a Jewish person or Hindu, often they don't have a chaplain of their own on the ship. And they go to the chaplains, there's a certain procedure to be approved to say, okay, you're a legitimate representative of this belief group, and you can facilitate meetings in the absence of a chaplain. He said, I'd like to participate in that program as well. He's got approval from the Humanist Society, which is recognized as a church, and they're turning him away. The chaplain said, no, we're not going to help you. Maybe what you'd like to do is write to the admiral at the Pentagon and ask him for it. So that's the kind of support they're getting. Hey, petty officer, you just write to the admiral yourself. We're not going to help out. Ryan Jean, he's performed weddings. He's recognized as a humanist celebrant. He's at Fort Meade right now as a captain. He's asked for the same support through the Army, and he's been turned away for years. For over 2 years, they've just ignored that application and told him no, that he won't be treated equally. Ray Bradley, he's a major, going towards retirement. He's been in the Army for 20 years in the medical profession. And he asked also to be a lay leader, but also simply to identify as a humanist on his official records. You can be over 80 different types of Christian, you can be Catholic or Mormon or Hindu, you can be Swedenborgian, you can be Church of God Cleveland, Tennessee, or you can be Church of God Anderson, Indiana. Lots of options there. And he said, I'd like to put humanist on. Atheist was an option. He said, I want to identify as what I am, not what I'm not. I want to participate and be positive. He sent that request up, and the chaplains reached out to block it. Wasn't even in their area, it's just a simple personnel entry, and they reached out and they're continuing to block that action. So we can't even be ourselves. We can't even identify as who we are. Jason Heap, he's not in the military yet, but he wants to be. He wants to be a U.S. military chaplain in the Navy. He's a graduate of Bright Divinity School at Texas Christian University with a Master of Divinity degree. He's got a master's degree in religious history from Oxford University. He's been all over the world, from the Middle East to China. He's a world traveler, has a lot of experience, and has spent his life mostly in the education field, mentoring young people. And his application has been sitting since July, entirely 100% complete and qualified, and they refuse to even meet with us to discuss the application. So we're very concerned that they're trying to make this application go away with a fully qualified candidate. That's not just something that's a concession to us, but it's something that should be appreciated and valued as diversity of belief within the military. It's something that they should see as a great opportunity for them to expand, not just to monotheists and polytheists and pantheists, but also to the non-theists, to make sure that they have something for everyone legitimately. And for some reason, they seem to be very unwilling to do that. And that's the main concern that we have right now, this application for Jason Heap to be humanist chaplain. That's what we hope that they can look at and make a decision. Do they want to accept and support diversity, or do they want to discriminate? And that's a decision that people in the military are going to have to make. The other minutes? I want to talk about in Congress, members of Congress, Representative Conaway. He said, oh, a humanist chaplain would just tell people they're worm food, tell a dying Christian that they're worm food. Now, I can assure you that that would never happen. We would not tolerate it. It's disrespectful. It's ignorant. And that's just the representation that they want to make from us. They didn't call us and ask. They didn't invite our opinion. They just decided that we were hateful. Now, I did that. Representative Fleming, a colleague of Representative Conaway, pushing some of this discriminatory attitudes towards us. I asked him personally, face to face. I said, Representative Fleming, I can assure you that we would not tell the Christian soldier they're worm food. We would try to support them and even provide information about prayers and give them assistance that they need to support them on their terms. I want to ask you, what should a Christian soldier tell a dying atheist soldier? And he said he should provide him, show them the way of salvation through Jesus Christ. That's what he told me. So the outrage should not be that a humanist simply wants to serve in the military as a chaplain. The outrage should be that Representative Fleming, a member of Congress, thinks that Christian chaplains should proselytize dying soldiers. That's what our outrage should be. And also with Congressman Sam Johnson. He's a POW, 7 years of POW in war, a very impressive person I have a lot of respect for his military background, but he went on record saying there's no atheists in foxholes, just ignoring our service, my own service as a combat veteran, just ignoring us. And that's what we have to deal with, those young soldiers. They're working against members of Congress who want to ignore them, and that's what I hope your members, other members in Congress can really reach out, like Representatives Polis, Andrews, and Smith, who've reached out to support us. I hope they can provide more support to drown out the bigotry that is within Congress. And as you look at these options, you know that there's real people, real faces reaching out to participate. And the discrimination and privileging of Christianity, these are all concerns that we have because you can't have equality in a context of discrimination. But those can be easily supported by providing equal rights to us with humanist identity on our official records, lay leaders and support for humanists from chaplains, and also just approve the fully qualified, eminently qualified humanist chaplain candidate that's right in front of the military right now with a fully complete application. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we're going to hear from All Things International, Michael DeJour with Center for Inquiry.
Thank you, Edwina, and thank you all for coming on this wonderfully wet and cold day. I can't help but mention I was talking with someone just before the event started, and as you may be able to tell, there are professional models here, certainly helping us feel more comfortable. And I said, it's interesting as we flip through this, I wonder what Thomas Jefferson and James Madison would have thought. And my friend's response was quite accurate, actually. He would have said, or they would have said, what is a model? Right? So a lot's changed, obviously, in the last 200 plus years on Capitol Hill. But it is a pleasure to be here because we're talking about some really important stuff today. We're talking about as we've been talking about the last 45 minutes or so, how to accomplish a secular public policy in the United States. What I'm going to talk about is the international section of the report. So I just wanted to do a quick straw poll. How many of you have heard of Pastor Saeed Abedini? He's the Christian pastor who's in jail in Iran right now. And you've heard a lot from religious groups talking about how the Obama administration has not taken up his case well enough for them to be pleased. Well, you hear a lot about this pastor, but how many of you have heard of Alexander Ahn? We do have one. What about Raif Badawi, or Asif Mohidin, or Albert Saber, or Qassem Al-Ghazali? These are all people who, at some place in the world, have faced persecution simply because they are an atheist, or they've gone on social media and posted that they are an atheist. So the story of Alexander Ahn is actually a really important story because it illustrates some of the things that the international section addresses in this report. Alexander Ahn was roughly a 30-year-old civil servant living in Indonesia. It's early 2012, and Alexander, after growing up in a pretty kind of narrow-minded Islamic household, decides that he is no longer a practicing Muslim. And so he goes on Facebook and Twitter and the internet and tries to find other people in his area of Indonesia that might be thinking the same as him. He finds some of them. He ends up founding a Facebook group called the Pyongyang Atheist. It's an area of Indonesia. Anyway, one day in 2012, Alexander goes to work as a civil servant, and an angry mob shows up outside of his workplace, drags him outside, and proceeds to beat him up. So the people inside call the police, and the police come, and they say, "What's going on?" And the angry mob says, "He's committed blasphemy. He went on Facebook and posted that God didn't exist." So the police brought him in and charged him with blasphemy, charged him with insulting religion, also charged him with lying on a government document. In Indonesia, you have to belong to one of 6 religions, and atheism or humanism are not on that list. So technically, by saying he was a Muslim on his government document, he was lying, even though there was no option to be an atheist. Now, Alexander went through the entire process of going on trial and found a lawyer. Unfortunately, he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison and fined $10,000 US for posting on Facebook that they didn't believe in God. This is the kind of thing we face all over the world. Now, we know these names. I know the names of Alexander Ahn. Raif Badawi is currently in prison in Saudi Arabia right now. He was sentenced to 7 years in jail and 600 lashes for starting a website that promotes open dialogue on religion and politics. Asif Mohidin is someone who lives in Bangladesh. He's a blogger who's been harassed by the government, arrested several times for his writings about religion. We know these names because we've been working on this stuff as a secular community. We've been working on finding people around the world who are being persecuted based on their lack of belief or based on their just general dissent from the uniform religion that society might practice. And our main goal in this work is actually to promote the American values that are enshrined in international law. So, just quickly, I would note that I know that there's a lot of skepticism on Capitol Hill regarding the United Nations as a vessel for America to get involved in global human rights debates. One thing that everyone should know is actually that international norms, especially on freedom of religion, belief, and expression, actually echo American norms on those rights. So, for example, one thing I'd mention is that both of the founding documents of these charters, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the UN, the US Constitution, neither mention God. They don't set up any state religion. They don't require religious belief. In fact, the US Constitution only mentions God to say that there will be no religious test for public office. The UN Declaration of Human Rights protects the rights to freedom of thought, conscience, religious belief, secular belief, and expression. So does the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Articles 18 and 19. This is the main international treaty on human rights at the UN. protects explicitly freedom of religion, freedom of belief, and freedom of expression. This matches the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which protects freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association. But there is a problem in terms of international human rights norms, and it's Article 20 of the ICCPR, which is an article that the U.S. signed on to the ICCPR with reservations about Article 20. Article 20 carves out an exemption or exception to limit speech based on incitement. The concept of if you've incited religious hatred or some kind of hostility in the country, then we could say that that speech is dangerous and we should put you in jail. As I said, the U.S. signed on to this treaty with reservations about Article 20. But unfortunately, Article 20 has been used by many countries, like Indonesia, to put people in jail for speaking their mind. When Alexander Ahn went through his trial, the charge that he was finally convicted on was inciting religious hatred and hostility in the country. Now, there has been some progress, I will note. Recently, after 10 years of passing the General Assembly and the UN Human Rights Council, there was a resolution called the Defamation of Religions Resolution, which implored UN member states to go back to their countries and pass blasphemy laws, laws criminalizing speech critical of religion. Those resolutions, after 10 years of passing, are no longer around. They've lost support, and so the UN has moved on from those resolutions to resolutions to protect the rights of people rather than the rights of ideas. And more specifically, in terms of that loophole that I spoke about, last year, the UN Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights held a series of workshops with human rights experts around the world to clarify what the term incitement means. And they clarified that the term incitement does not allow countries to put people in jail simply for speaking their mind about religion, but that there has to be an imminent threat to public order and public safety, which is very much like U.S. courts have handled things. The problem really, though, and this is where I'll close and hand it back over, is not necessarily international norms, but enforcement. The problem is not necessarily that we don't have international treaties protecting basic human rights like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. The ICCPR, for example, has been interpreted by the UN Human Rights Committee, which is the body that interprets that consistently as the years go by and new media comes up on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot. And they've been pretty explicit that this includes the right to be an atheist, to criticize, if not make fun of and prod at religion. The problem is not that those things don't exist. The problem is enforcement. The problem is that Indonesia signed on to the ICCPR and has not kept up with its commitments and promises to the international community. So there are some things that the U.S. government, I think, can do, and this is what we have in the report. So just quickly, U.S. diplomatic staff that's involved in the United Nations should work with secular non-governmental organizations just as they work with religious NGOs. So, for example, there are lots of Catholic and Christian groups who speak about issues of persecution around the world at the UN. There are now a growing number of secular groups at the UN. The International Humanist and Ethical Union is there, the Center for Inquiry is there, the British Humanist Association is there, now Atheist Alliance International just got recognition at the UN. The U.S. diplomatic staff should work very closely with those groups to track and monitor cases of persecution abroad and call attention to those cases. In the same way, the U.S. State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom and the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is the semi-independent body located down here in D.C., should also work with these groups. And in fact, the relationship in some way already has started. The Secular Coalition, American Humanist Association, and Center for Inquiry last year went for a meeting with the U.S. State Department's Office of International Freedom, and we've been in contact with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, so we hope those relationships continue to move forward. The State Department should, as they're hearing about these cases that we're discussing, lean on some of its diplomatic allies, some of these countries that have signed up for international commitments and that we have trade agreements with, but are not living up protecting the human rights that they promised to. Lastly, an issue that a lot of people don't think about, the U.S. is the largest single financial contributor to the United Nations. It funds a lot of what the United Nations does. Some of the estimates are around a quarter of the funding that the UN gets every year is actually from the U.S. government, which means that we have a responsibility to care about where that money is going in the UN And there have been a number of reports suggesting that key mechanisms at the UN that are made to track human rights abuses and report those back to the UN are underfunded. And that positions within the UN that are responsible for tracking human rights abuses are underfunded. So I think that we can do a lot more work as a community trying to track down some of this information, but it would be an interesting process to have the US government become more involved in monitoring just how exactly our money is being spent at the UN and ensuring that it's protecting human rights that are so fundamental, both in American law and in international law. Thank you.
So our final section will be health and safety. We're going to hear from Amanda Kinney with American Atheists. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for sticking with us. So there's 9 pages basically covering health and safety. This was quite an extensive project. And I won't go into depth about it because you can read through it yourself, you can see the recommendations. Instead, what I want to do is just talk a little bit about what we found when we did this. And that is there's a lot of common ground between those of us who call ourselves non-theists and those who are religious. It really isn't about one versus the other. It's about making sure that religious liberty belongs to the individual. And I have religious liberty as an atheist, and everyone who has a religion has their own religious liberty. And what we find is that when people who are very religious come to politics, they feel a sense of obligation to put that into their laws. They want to bring that into the bills that they pass. They feel a sense of obligation to share what they feel is the right and moral way to live. And the problem with that is that not everyone shares the same way of wanting to live. And we find a lot of these laws come into the health and safety arena. And so what we're looking for in this area is for those who bring religion in to take a step back and recognize that not everyone is going to live the same way that they are. They're not going to share the same religious values. And to take a step back and just look at having a basic stepping plane for everyone. That we have scientific standards, that we have basic education standards, that we use the same standards for everyone, and that we don't try to use religious guidelines to pass laws. And this applies from everything from women's health issues to children's health issues to the recovery programs. I'm going to touch on that basically because this is a fairly new issue that we're finding in the federal courts. When people go into court and they are faced with either jail time or a recovery program for alcohol and substance abuse issues, they are often faced with Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. These are very well-established programs that are based upon a theistic belief system. And those of us who are non-theistic have no other option. And several federal courts at the district level have ruled that this is unconstitutional and that you have to supply a non-theistic alternative. There are several listed in the secular model guide, and I encourage you to look at that issue. It's very important because there are some people who are willing to go to jail instead of trying to tackle God as part of their recovery program because they know they're doomed to fail. And no one should have to do that. No one should be forced to accept God as part of their recovery program or go to jail. Also with the children, I want to talk about that briefly. We're seeing, for example, in the Middle East, there's been an outbreak of polio. And here in the United States, we're seeing whooping cough make a comeback. These are because people are not getting their children vaccinated. These are serious health issues and concerns because if people are not getting vaccinated, now granted in Syria and reasons it has to do more with war, but in the United States it's because of concern for both because of misinformation about what vaccines do and also because people believe they have a religious right not to. I would say that not vaccinating your children it is harming your children. And it harms other people's children, it harms other people in the community, and we want to make that point. If you have a child that you don't vaccinate and you take that child to the playground or to daycare or someplace that doesn't regulate vaccinations, there are children there who can't get vaccinated because of health problems or who are too young, and you are exposing them to that disease or to those illnesses. And that happened in Minnesota. We did mention that in the guide, and there are examples of that, measles outbreaks, that killed children all across the United States and also attacked Christian Science communities and other communities throughout the country. So this is a growing concern because of the fear of vaccinations and what they do, and it's very important to get real information out. I think it's important to note that in this health and safety guide, we got both religious and non-religious groups to talk about it. I don't think we're so far apart on these issues, and it's very important to have a dialogue with religious groups on this. While we do have a very vocal religious groups that are putting forth what they think is best for everyone, there are many religious groups that say, you know what, we're not trying to put our beliefs on everyone, we're with you. And we need to make more allies of them. And that's what this guide is meant to do in part, is to let everyone know that it's not about trying to strip religious liberty from the person, it's about keeping one person or one group's religious ideology out of law. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them after we're done here. Thank you.
All right, so we are done with our prepared remarks. Does anyone have any questions or comments or advice for us? If you do, now is a good time. Looks like we did a good job of this. All right, so we'll be here available, and please join us for sparkling cider and chocolate-covered strawberries, and collect our cards, and let's mix and mingle a little. And we're going to do it again over on the Senate side this afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you. Big round of applause.